Hi, and welcome to Together, the podcast where we dive into that juicy terrain of conscious partnership and parenting so that we can bring you the lived experience, the conversations, the tools, the skills for you to deepen in love in your relationships. I am your host, Mike Elliott, and with me is Courtney Wren. We have devoted our entire life to learning and refining our skills in this relational space. And we're so grateful that you have decided to join us on that journey. And before we dive into today's episode, a couple quick announcements. First one is I'm so stoked to announce our most recent sponsor, Mindful Meds. I've been using their products, so has Courtney, for a while now. One of my favorite products that they have is called Happy Days. This thing is packed with lion's mane, cordyceps, I think there's holy basil in there, black pepper, and ashwagandha. And this really helps me in my biology, my body, my nervous system. It really manages cortisol levels. It really gives me this mental focus so that I can be in flow when I'm creating content like this. Oh, it just brings and invokes this sense of joy. I love it. And if you want to try some of their medicinal mushroom products that they have all kinds. And for being a valued listener, we want to give you 15% off. All you have to do is at the checkout page, put in the promo code TOGETHER, and bam, dollars in your pocket. If you haven't already ordered from them, scroll down into the show notes. There'll be a link to their website, and then the promo code will also be there. And now for our last announcement, just speaking about the new human event, October 4th and 6th, which we've been talking about, we've been so excited for, and we're just a few weeks away. The doors close for tickets September 20th. So this is the final stretch. I want to really make sure that you get your tickets in there. I'll be emceeing it. Courtney and I will be speaking at it. Dr. Kevin Presson, Charles Eisenstein, Zach Bush, Andrea Gurr, and some sound bath healing. It's just going to be an epic experience with this theme and this focus of regeneration. Courtney and I's piece, of course, will be on sacred relationship. We would love to see you there, and we also want to give you a discount for this. Just go down in the show notes, click the link, and then put in the promo code TOGETHER15. That's going to give you 15% off either the general admission or the VIP experience, which is a whole additional day, which I hope to see you at. That's actually like 85% of the tickets. People are going for the whole experience, which I don't blame them. So really hope to see you there. And now let's dive into the show. And today we are going to be exploring this topic of the nervous system in relationship. Do you want to start us off?
Mm-hmm. We're excited about this one. The nervous system and trauma is a huge part of the work that Mike and I do with people. Somatics, you've probably heard that buzzword. I'm a somatic therapist. Mike works very somatically. And we wanted to dive into this topic because there's so much buzz out there around trauma, around the nervous system. It's so good as we come more into the consciousness of our body and the actual consciousness of our nervous system. And what we want to introduce and talk about is this interesting place in relationship because, you know, we didn't want to use the word trauma to describe in the title because trauma can be this word that is, you know, big trauma. There's this thing we say in somatic work, which is big T trauma, which is like you have a car accident, you know, have an incident that's really, you know, impactful. You maybe get attacked or raped or something like this. And that's there, and that'll all come up in the relational field. And there's something called little t trauma. And little t trauma is little things that have been overwhelming for our nervous system throughout our life, or places where we weren't quite met in the way that we needed, and there was just like ongoing little misses developmentally, relationally that happen.
Can I add a piece there that I find is helpful when we're talking about trauma in the little t? You know, trauma, to oversimplify in your mind to make sense of, it's too much, too fast, too intense for the nervous system.
Yes, thank you. That's right. It's like, and so, you know, that can just look like, you know, your mom gets really flustered when it's time to transition out of the home. She stops properly attuning to you, and, there's a rushing, intense energy, and you have to dissociate to cope with that. And that happens every time you leave the home, And over time, it creates in you that your nervous system isn't able to regulate when you're transitioning. This is an example. So it doesn't mean something really big and scary, although in the nervous system, it can feel big and scary, because especially when we're really little, we so need that safety of our parents' nervous system. Now, in the relational space, what's interesting is that we're working with the personal material of that, the little T's and the big T's, the big traumas and the little traumas. And we'll get into more about what that really looks like in the nervous system in a little bit. But I wanted to orient us a little bit to the bigger picture of, as a culture, we are a traumatized culture. So what I mean by that is, in somatic experiencing, what I'm trained in, we call it global intensity, high intensity trauma. So it's a background level of trauma and dysregulation that lives in our nervous system that's cultural. It's a cultural, things are going too fast, too quick, too soon. So what that looks like is, children ending up in school too young, teachers expecting children to perform faster than they're actually developmentally ready, children being overstimulated at too young of an age, children being born in hospitals that are really overstimulating and, being met with gloves and masks and, all of these things, like big lights. These are all creating sort of a backdrop or a soup in our culture, especially in the Western world, of trauma, overstimulation. And so what that means is, for any of you couples out there, or people, in the realm of wanting to call in conscious partnership and doing your work, is that not only are we encountering in each other the big T's and the little T's of our personal material, but we're also working with the cultural overstimulation and the ancestral traumas. So all of the information in the field of our ancestors that's there, that is in our cells, in our DNA, and expressing through us all the time. And so what that means is, you could be in a relationship or living a life that's pretty grounded, that feels pretty good. Maybe most of your day feels, resourcing, and there's a lot of love in your relationship. But trauma and the nervous system can show up in a way of just not feeling like you can deepen, or feeling a bit numb, or maybe not even noticing that about our culture, not even noticing that there's an overstimulation, happening. And so what's so interesting is there are couples out there who it's really obvious, you've got a lot of trauma. Mike and I are like that, in the sense that we both had pretty significantly traumatized nervous systems that was presenting in a really big way, like lots of symptoms. Like, I'll speak for myself, but I, when I was in my early 20s, my nervous system was so dysregulated that it was so obvious that I had to do something about it. Like, it was very obvious, lots of dysregulation, lots of anxiety, and I had to dive into it. I had to dive into the world of trauma. I had to, either that, or I would have become someone that probably had like fibromyalgia, chronic illness, this kind of thing. And I know for you, Mike, how would you describe?
Yeah, for me, the choice point in my life was I've destroyed enough relationships. The breaking point for me was destroyed a lot of relationships, pushed a lot of people away. And then my previous marriage ended, and I was at this painful place where I couldn't even really be in myself. Like the ruminating thoughts, the feelings, I wanted to kill myself. I felt like that was the only way out. And I didn't know the verbiage around trauma or what, but it did bring me to my knees, to a place where like, I need someone to help me. And then as soon as I started to receive relational support, I started to have insights like, oh, I have trauma. I'm a traumatized person. I need to learn about this. I need to develop relational skills. I need to be supported a lot, frequently, consistently, over time, so that I can repattern this. So that's where mine kind of came in, is life. I co-created the circumstance where I'm like, I have to do something about this.
Yes. And so beautiful. And so some of you out there, this is what you're working with. You know, you're working with dysregulation. It's really obvious you're struggling, and then you're coming into relationship and you're learning how to work with that material together. And how do we start to build safety? How do we build ground? How do we unwind this in our nervous systems? And then for some of you, and this is so not talked about enough in the trauma world, is for some of you, and I'm going to say this directly, everyone out there listening, you have trauma, and a lot of it. Even if there's not specific memories you have, or you feel like you didn't have a lot of it, ancestrally and culturally, we have a lot of trauma as a culture. There's a lot to unwind, and a lot that wasn't unwound and healed in our ancestors. Now, having said that, if we came into enough health and enough of a field that met us just enough, what can happen is we can go through life and we don't reach the tipping point that spills us over into becoming super aware of it. So, with Mike and I, my cup was already, so full of trauma by the time I was 19 that all it took was a couple more things and my nervous system was just kablooey, right? But that's also the gift of trauma. And they talk about this a lot in the trauma world, is the gift of trauma, when we have enough of it, is it forces us to wake up. It forces us to look at it. It forces us to be like, holy shit. And then as we turn towards it, we become awakened to the fact that we're actually walking around with all of our ancestors in our body, that we're actually in a culture that's not attuning properly, that we're actually in a culture that's not meeting our needs properly. But if we didn't reach that tipping point, like if our coping strategies were just enough and our life met us just enough, what can happen is we don't spill over into that reckoning. Mm-hmm. So we're walking around carrying all of this ancestral trauma. We're walking around carrying all of this unprocessed stuff and influenced by this culture, but it's not in our face. We're not aware of it. There's not these big symptoms that force us to look. And so then what that can look like is we're in relationship, right? And we're in our coping strategies together. And maybe we grew up with enough love or enough modeling of healthy structure that we're able to be fairly amicable, But what will happen is that if we don't start to awaken to the reality that is around us, to the reality of the soup of the trauma, or the trauma in each other, or the dysregulation, the numbness, all of this, then we will be limited in the amount of intimacy we can have, and also in the amount of awakening that can happen. And I want to hear what you have to say about this, Mike, because for me, what I feel so excited about with sacred, like the idea, the concept, the experience of sacred relationship, is relationship itself is the vehicle within which we get to digest and heal all of that ancestral trauma and the collective trauma. It's like what heals that rupture from being born in the hospital from a C-section, and it's like scary and overwhelming. It's love, it's warmth, it's going slow, touch, safety. What heals being misattuned with by a teacher and kind of being rushed ahead to perform? Someone going slower with us, someone being curious about our pace, someone holding space for what we need. It's relationship. And so if we are talking about really the root of sacred relationship is where we get to start to consciously digest the layers that we're all walking around with. Not that that's the end goal. The end goal is not just like that's what we're doing. The end goal is the alchemy that happens when those generational layers meet love. And then, if we zoom out the big picture of sacred relationship, what we're doing then is we're healing our culture. We're bringing more safety in. We're bringing more attunement in. We're bringing in more love. And so some of you out there are going to be like, oh my gosh, yes, we need more love. Things feel ungrounded. We can get really overwhelmed with the amount of material that's spilling everywhere. And then some of you out there are going to be like, I don't really notice a lot of that. I feel like there's a lot of goodness, but I do feel kind of numb, or I just kind of feel like I'm going through life and I'm doing the thing and I'm feeling like I need more. I want more, but I don't really know what that would be. And so both of those, I want you to understand, are influenced by trauma in the nervous system. We all have so much. And the invitation is, regardless of which side you are on, when we can start to get curious about our nervous systems and the material that they hold, because they hold generations and generations and like everything that's happened is held in our nervous system, then life becomes really fascinating and interesting. We start to become literally like architects of life. We get to become, alchemizers of the story of life, and to recreate what our culture, our society, our school systems, our families can look like.
Yeah, and we get to cultivate relational skills that makes us a safer person on the planet, which I don't know about you, but that's really fulfilling for me, is learning those skills. And not everyone wants to do this work. And what Courtney's talking about is trauma it can express in so many different ways. And if you're tuning in and listening, this is one that I like to bring in as well, because like Courtney and I's trauma, it's pretty evident. Like, it's big, it can be explosive, it's pretty evident. There's some people out there, and I watch this with clients, if there's verbiage around, I had a pretty good childhood, but you struggle relationally, that's a really good sign that there was relational trauma. Mm-hmm. That there was impact, even if it was just in the womb. Mm-hmm. Like, a lot of people can scan back and be like, oh, I don't have any remembering of anything bad happening. Sometimes the thing that was so traumatizing was even just back in the womb. Mm-hmm. And the reason I'm sharing that is some of this trauma goes so far back, pre-memory. Some of this trauma is so subtle because of the layers of freeze and numbness. This is what we talk about in the trauma world. When it comes to this language of the nervous system, freeze and numbness is part of a coping mechanism to still keep showing up in life, still be able to do the things. You can have lots of success in lots of areas, but maybe feel really alone, insecure inside, confused why your relationships don't feel good, or you can't feel your partner, or you receive lots of reflections that your partner doesn't feel met by you. Like, these are good signs and invitations to go in. This isn't everyone's work, but if you're listening to this and still listening, my imagining and this is for you. And so what's really exciting about this terrain is we get to understand that what shows up in relationship in the form of trauma, the more we get to know it, we're actually getting to know more of ourselves. It's like, what does my field invoke in another? What skills am I being invited to develop to be able to meet my partner? And the thing that I really like to bring in is like the antidote or the salve to trauma is really developing the skill to slow down in self, in our bodies, to be able to respond versus react when something really challenging happens. Like, this is the antidote. This is how we can then help each other heal. And we can see this on the big picture. Courtney beautifully took us into the big picture also, and how so much of this is collective trauma. When big events happen, like COVID, like just these really big, wars overseas, when things like that happen, the thing that's going to help all of that resolve is that collectively we have more capacity to take a breath, to slow down, and to be open and curious of what's needed with what's happening. Like, where is this coming from that's beyond this moment? Like, where is this actually coming from? And what do we need to do? This is my orientation. What do I need to do for myself to develop the capacity to be able to respond instead of react? Because if I react, I'm feeding it. If I react, I am now in it. I'm in the trauma. I'm feeding it. I'm adding to the story. I'm not emotionally available to really hear and attune with what's happening for the other. How this shows up in Courtney and I's relationship is, if she's feeling hurt and has a big wave of emotion, if I go into reactivity and wanting to defend and fight, my trauma's just recapitulating the hurt and the harm of what's happening for her. And the work in this place is, okay, I'm just going to breathe. I'm going to find my seat, what's happening for me, so that I can be curious of where I wonder is this coming from? What is this actually about? And what are the ingredients that are needed to help that part that I'm witnessing and relating with soften and like slow down and soothe? The more we can do this for each other, that's the work. This is the sacred dance. This is sacred relationship. The invitation, the motivation to be able to want to do this work and to get curious. Where do I have trauma? Are there places I haven't even been aware of it? Getting to know all those parts, we get to develop the skill that's really going to help other people heal as well as yourself. And that's the most rewarding place to be.
Yeah, I love this metaphor or this story or this like thing that was a practice, has been a practice in many cultures as a practice, of when the warriors come back from the hunt or they come back from the war, then the village receives them, holds them, allows them to feel their feelings. It welcomes them back, like, come back, like, wow, celebrating at first. You did it. Like, you fought off the whatever, you ran away from whatever, you used your survival nervous system to survive. And then it's come in, like, we feed you, we love you, we embrace you, we touch you, we sing to you, we rub your body so that you can actually release all of that pent up survival energy to actually return back to the village.
And an important piece to add there, because this is really a big element of the nature of Courtney and I's work, is a big part of what those cultures did would hold space for the stories of them sharing what happened out there.
Yeah.
Because we relationally as a species need to be seen, heard, and understood to be able to integrate all of that and it actually become alchemized power and confidence and like, I did survive that. I did overcome that. And this is amazing. And that is a huge part of what I feel we are all being invited to embody, is the capacity to hold space for the stories that are coming to the surface that are needing to be seen, heard, and understood and felt in the felt sense, so that they can land and move through, like Courtney sharing, it can move through all of that survival energy and discharge it and land into a felt sense of safety.
Yeah, we really need, it's just like children, when we go out and we experience something stressful, we experience these experiences, we need to be able to come back and receive back into safety so that we can digest and integrate and shake loose whatever needs to be shake loose. But what happens, I want you to just sit with this for a second, what happens if a warrior goes off to war and experiences a whole bunch of shocking things, and then they come back and everyone just says, oh, great. And you're just go meditate in the forest and help yourself get centered and then come on in and you can, start to just take on your role in the village.
Yeah,
like,
here's all your chores.
Here's all your chores. Great. Thumbs up. And I want you to realize that for most of our culture, that's what it looks like. I even think of this example where, just to give you an example where this just shows up in everyday, is we were at a beach and a little girl started to drown out at a river, and Mike was trained as a lifeguard, and he mobilized right away, swam out there, got her. It was amazing. She was so grateful, grabbed onto his neck. Mike brings her back. And, there's no judgment on the parents, because my guess is their nervous systems was in a healthy culture, relational culture, what that would look like is now we stand on the beach and we welcome that little girl back. Are you okay? What are you feeling? What are you needing? And then she gets to be like, that was so scary, and I didn't know if anyone was coming, and maybe she cries, and there's a landing back.
Which, thank God her brother was there, because her brother offered her that. Like, they walked, I remember watching them after, where they like walked around like talking about it and processing, and she felt a little like shy and embarrassed, but no one else in the adult realm, and this is part of the collective trauma, in right order, the families, the adults would be the one providing that. And this is where things can get a little murky and messy, is if the kids have to become the adult to do that for themselves. That is the thing that starts to create an impact in the healthy development, because it's really meant to come from the adults and elders.
And so just to paint the picture of what ended up happening is the parents, and my projection is they were feeling shame because they hadn't been able to help her and they weren't there. Instead of receiving her with love, and they went in to shut down in their nervous systems. They probably haven't been received in that way in themselves. And they just it was just like, great, thanks. What were you doing out there anyway, out in the river? And then just move on. Well, that for sure would get logged as an intense thing in that little girl's nervous system. Maybe not because her brother met her. But here is this moment where relationship can welcome you back to safety. But if you're not met with the warmth and the accurate reflection of, that must have been really scary. I felt really scared. I noticed my body feels scared. We can't integrate. Our nervous system actually stays stuck in a freeze. So what happens is it's overwhelming. We felt life and death. We go into a freeze. And now that just stays. It doesn't integrate. We don't come back into safety. And guess what? Now we're a little bit further from other people. Because the minute there's that layer of numbness, that layer of freeze, we're a little bit further from intimacy. We're a little bit further. And it seems like just a little moment. I'm sure they all went home and didn't even think about it. But for sure that got logged in that little girl's nervous system as, I'm alone. There's a part of me that's alone. And she might not be conscious of it. This is in the nervous system. But our nervous systems have a healthy blueprint that we need to be welcomed back by the village when we have had an overwhelming, scary experience. We need it to reflect back the scariness of what happened. And then we need it to be, and you're safe now. Mm-hmm. And you can feel all of that now.
Well, can I share how and I'm not saying this is the ultimate truth, but when I remember back looking at her body language, what was processing is her shoulders were curled forward. Yeah. Her head was tucked down while she was walking around talking with her brother, because there was a shaming coming from her parents. And then they just went back to sitting in their place in the beach. There was no, my imagining, and I just know this in myself, like if I went through something scary where I went underwater and someone had to save me, I would want my mom to hold me, ask me how I'm doing, like hold space, rub my, like I would want soothing and like to really show that I matter.
And maybe even mom to say, I'm so sorry I wasn't there.
Yes.
Like I say that to Cedar just to add that, like, I'm so sorry mom didn't notice, or I'm so sorry that I didn't think of that could hurt.
And absolutely. And that would be a healthy offering of that experience to help it integrate, because life's going to happen. Traumas are going to happen. It's not about avoiding the event. It's the bringing in the ingredients to help integrate what happens in the nervous system, so it doesn't log as something that takes away those social skills, or it doesn't start to become internalized, like something's wrong with me, I'm bad. We need to be met by the village. This is a really big thing that we invite, Courtney and I. is these places do need relational attunement to heal.
Mm-hmm.
That's the healing. The hurt happens in relationship, or the lack of, and the healing needs to happen in relationship. That's just how we function. And so looking back at that little girl as an example, you know, her with her like head down, shoulders like curled over, her body was showing the signs of, I want to be small, I don't want to be seen, because what she was actually needing is to be seen and held. And her system would have found her way out of that as that was processed and met by parents. And my sense is that did start to shift by her having her brother there.
Mm-hmm.
And then they did start to go back into play and then moved back towards the water.
But she didn't get to, what I perceived is she didn't get to go through the, oh my God, that was so scary.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I was so frightened, and cry. And she didn't get to do that. And what I saw in her body, and again, this could be a projection, but what I saw is her start to stand really tall and take on the parentified child of, I'm alone in the world and I have to act like an adult, and there isn't time for me to feel my feelings. And the thing is, that happens so young for kids in our society, because when we're not met in that moment where we get to be small, then it's like we learn and tune in, because I guarantee you every person listening knows this experience in some way, because I don't know how we couldn't in this culture. That moment where instead of being met with compassion, instead of being met with love, we got the message, this is life, you're going to have to figure it out, suck it up and move on. And then that actually, it becomes an empowering thing. But the thing to understand is it's a coping strategy that keeps us locked in a story of, I'm alone. And it can feel empowering because I don't need people as much as I used to need them, but it actually prevents intimacy. And we all have like so many of these micro moments that happen in our life. Now, some of you, though, it's important to name, may have had a parent or both parents or a grandma or an aunt or who could meet you. And if we were able to get met some of the time or have experiences of that, that is going to make it a lot easier for us to move through those places. It's going to mean that we don't go so far away, you know, so that we're all on a spectrum. And if you had that, yay, you know, lean into that.
I think Gabor Mate has done research on that, and isn't it 30% of the time, if we're met 30% of the time, that can create secure attachment?
Yes, yeah, it's 30% attunement. And although I would say if we have a really big experience of trauma, we'd need to be met in it at some point. Like we couldn't, if we weren't met with, if that was one of the like 70% where we weren't met, it would be locked in the body.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I think we heard that from Terry Real.
Yeah, right. Terry Real. And I'm so glad, that you're speaking to that part, because I'm just remembering as we're talking about that event, it's such a good example.
Mm-hmm.
Because we were in community. There's a whole bunch of people
on the beach. And so there was almost a responsibility of everyone on the beach to be aware that there's kids out there, you know, that's just a part of, this is in a healthy system. Mm-hmm. Everyone would have a little bit of a pulse on that. And then if something happened, the whole community would come together and help what's needed and all the things. It was ironic, or not ironic, but it was very shocking and surprising for me that no one else mobilized. Mm-hmm. And everyone just acted like nothing had happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is really interesting. And then going back to the parentified child piece, just remembering when I went back before we left the beach, I went back to that little girl. I'm like, hey, because I could see, you know, she was feeling a bit of shame. I just want to check in. How you doing? Like, are you okay? That must have been really, you know, that was really scary. And I was reflecting back the thing that would be the thing, just because we do have this knowledge and background with trauma. And the parentified child piece was already setting place where she got big and she's like, oh yeah, no, I'm okay. I'm good. Yeah. And then just skipped over it. And like her nervous system sped up of like, no, everything's okay. And not wanting to go into it, because my imagining, and I've watched this with quite a few people lately actually, where it can be overwhelming to be attuned with, because maybe at home or in the regular environment, it's not okay to cry and process that energy.
And then what happens is our biology wants to release that energy.
Oh.
Our biology knows to release it, but we interrupt it. So what's interesting is animals would never interrupt that. They just let the survival energy move through. It could look like shaking. It could look like wailing. It could look like moving their head back and forth. But as humans, we'll override what wants to move through, and then it just stays locked in our system. And, here, I'm going to give you one other little example just to really, but this is an example where something different happened, where I had a choice point. So Cedar had to go for a dental surgery, and he's only 2. It was a lot for me to just like wrap myself around that. And there was this moment where Mike goes off with him wheels into the operating room with him. And I could feel the parentified child in me and what Courtney in the past would have done. And what I would have done is I would have been strong and I would have been fine. But what would have been happening is I would have been numbing out and I would be really far away from others. Like I would move far away to be fine. And because of the support we have, our beautiful therapist, she really suggested this. And the friends we have, we invited 2 really beautiful, relationally attuned friends, sisters, to come and be there with us. And so, I'm even going to cry right now as I tell it. And, in the hospital, it's like, there isn't that awareness. There's lots of just like, yep, it'll, the nurse is so beautiful, but they're like, he'll be fine. It's all fine. Everything's good. We're all good, and it's like, yeah. And also this is big. Like this is a big moment, and it was so powerful because I felt myself choose in that moment to feel it. Cedar had been wheeled off and I just let myself feel the feelings. And my beautiful friends, they just held me in the hallway. They just held me with no words. They just held me and rubbed my hair. And I could feel in that moment all of the ancestors in all of the moments where these things happened where they weren't held in that way. And then in that moment, it wasn't just me being held, it was all of them. All the moms where, there were scaring moments and there was too much survival energy. And it was amazing to feel how fast I moved through it just by them holding me. And then I was able to not numb, but actually relate and be with my friends. And we laughed and we meditated and we tuned, but I wouldn't have been able to do that if I hadn't been held and just like felt. And that would have been stuck in my nervous system, and when I would have received Cedar at the end, he would have felt that numbness. And then there would have been this other layer of separation, right? Like this is how, all these moments of separation.
And what an honor and what a gift for you to feel that, to have our beautiful community and friends there to hold you in that. Because even as you're sharing, I'm had waves of emotion there, because then the stories that were untold get to be here in the present moment. Like as you were feeling that and speaking to the ancestors that didn't have that, that's where, tears came for me, is feeling the grief of that. And feeling even in this, in our world where we have friends who are similar experience, but it didn't go well.
No,
and it
because they didn't have the relational support.
And this is why it's so beneficial, but also intimate and beautiful and nourishing. Like when I get to feel those tears, touching the pain and the grief of where there's been hurt in other people, it gives me information. It gives me a motivation to want to build the capacity to hold space for other people's pain so that I can feel the humanness in me, can feel the tenderness of my heart of like, oh, if I can feel that there, it gives me resource to feel what lives in me and learn to love that and to feel the feelings. Every time another person, like when you felt emotion there, it invokes emotion in me, because this is how our nervous systems are meant to be. We process it together. And it's not just your hurt, it's the collective hurt. It's up the generational line. And if we can build enough safety in our nervous system that when someone's feeling something, we all can feel what that brings up in us in the moment, that's the collective healing.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And this is what we get to be for our partners. So, when your partner is moving through something, when they're, there's the version where we prop up their coping mechanisms. We say, "That's great, Mike, that you've got yourself. Yay." Or oh, you're so good at moving through things on your own. And this is a version of where we can be loving, is we actually end up unconsciously supporting our partner's coping strategies, their numbness, and when we start to come into love, this is where we can actually start to invite each other, like, to not have to have that coping strategy. And I'm going to be the safe place that you can land, so that your nervous system can shake stuff out, so that you can release things. And, the question, why would I want to do that? Well, if we think about you as an essence, that you have your soul, you have your dharma, you have your essence, who you are. And then what life is we come into this nervous system. Basically, we're this essence that comes into this nervous system. And then the expression of how we are on the planet is the amalgamation, the synergy of our soul and that nervous system. Now, the more trauma, freeze, collapse, fight, flight, is in our nervous system, the more that distorts the way that our soul gets to express here in the physical form. It becomes this, an example is, if you have a lot of fight in your nervous system, you're going to have a lot of fights. Does that mean that you're in your essence, you're a fighter? Maybe not. I've had lots of things where I used to identify that this is who I was, but it wasn't at all. It was my coping strategies from my, And so when we start to do this for each other, become the safe place for another layer to unwind and hold each other, what happens is we're clearing space for each other's essence to be here. We're clearing space for the pureness of who we are to express in this nervous system, and for the nervous system to become more responsive to life, and we have more choice. Because the more trauma in the nervous system, the more we have no choice. The more we're just a whole bunch of coping strategies and reactions happening. And then what happens is we think that that's who we are. We think, well, this is who I am. And maybe there's flavors of that, maybe you are a really strong warrior person, but also, but there's a lot of rigidity in your body, and there's a lot of, there's no space for your vulnerability. And actually you have a really tender heart, and you actually are really creative, but you don't create because you have to be so responsible. Like, these are some examples. And so the gift we're giving each other is we're actually freeing each other. So when we do this work, we're freeing each other to not only become more our essence, to also become more human, because then we're actually in a nervous system that's alive and, being with life more fully. And then also we are creating more embodied love. So not just the big love of everything's love, but embodied, feeling, relational love.
I love recently learning from Alison Armstrong. This really hit home for me. So I want to give you listeners the visual of this, that we are two beings. We are part animal, and then we are this essence. We are this higher consciousness. We are this essence. We are this spiritual being, but we're animals. Like, that is the species that we are, is in this kingdom. We are an animal. This is the nervous system. This is the primal energy. And what we're inviting is to integrate both, so that the animal part is contained. It gets the benefit. It gets the integration of the wisdom of spirit, of responding instead of reacting. Because if we look at the nature of trauma is unintegrated spirit. It is animalistic behavior. It is reactivity. It's shaming. It's blaming. It's getting big. It's breaking things. It's
being numb, being silent, never taking up any space, always being nice.
Yeah, which is just animal. That's animal behavior.
That's fawning.
And there's nothing bad or wrong. This isn't to feel shame about. It's just honoring the part of us, the one part of this two-part system, animal. we're wanting to integrate more of the higher essence piece into the animal so that the animal is safer out in the kingdom.
And also, that's it. That's the journey. That's the unity. You know, when we're talking about all of these spiritual practices, what is the unity? That's it. That's the unity, the body and the spirit.
Yes.
This is what the goal is, the aim is just the beauty of those being connected. And so that's what the journey of sacred relationship is. And so I think it'd be powerful for us to just name, just really briefly, you know, what we're on a more just specific level. When we're talking about trauma, when we're talking about the nervous system, what we're talking about is where there's survival charge that is in the nervous system. And this is what is happening when we say in a relationship we're getting triggered, is that charge, that survival charge is evoked or hit on or brought out in the nervous system. And the ways that that can express is, it can express as fight. It can express as flight. It can also express as freeze. Now, freeze can look like two things. Freeze can look like I feel terrified inside, but I'm totally unable to do anything. But it can also look like freeze with dissociation, which is I'm frozen, but I'm not even feeling that I'm distressed. You know, when I tune in, I don't even feel distressed, and it's because I'm actually dissociated as well. And so that one can be really tricky to identify because there won't be a felt sense of panic until we start to work with the dissociation. And dissociation is where the feeling in our body is too much. The distress in our body is too much. We're not able to move it. We're not able to process. And so we dissociate. We either dissociate, we leave a part of ourselves. Like we can literally like dissociate from our foot because we injured our foot. We can literally dissociate from our whole body. We can dissociate from a part of our personality or a certain emotion. And we can also dissociate so much that we, you know, are actually hovering above our body. We're not even in our body very much. And, you know, this little girl, this story we told about the drowning, you know, she would have had to dissociate from the part of herself that would have wanted to go, mommy, mommy, that was so scary. Because that's there. That would absolutely be there in the biology. So she has to dissociate from that, basically. And then now you dissociate from that and it freezes. And now she's likely not going to do that in subsequent times.
Yeah. So
right?
now when when the similar sensations in the body that were happening while the event occurred, and how she was feeling in herself when she came back to the beach after I put her down and she was going to her family, those sensations that were coming up, if anything's familiar to that, unconsciously, her nervous system is just going to replay the coping mechanism, freeze, dissociate.
And also the feeling. So she might be an adult. So this is the way this could look like as an adult. Okay. Totally forgets about it. Doesn't even seem like a big event, you know? And now she's an adult in two things. One is there's this weird thing where, you know, whenever she feels trapped or stuck, that she feels like she's drowning. It doesn't make any sense. Like, it's like, oh my God, I feel like I can't get air. And she's, you know, and then it gets diagnosed with things as anxiety or, you know, this kind of thing. And then the other thing is it's likely that depending, you know, but that what will happen is when she has a really scary incidences, she doesn't reach out for help. So she gets in a car accident. She doesn't tell anybody, you know, she gets hurt, doesn't reach out for help. And so, you know, how many of us are walking around with those coping strategies, but we don't even remember where that came from.
Which I'd say collectively is one of the biggest ones, is the fear of feeling vulnerable and reaching out for help and support.
Yeah. I'm always shocked how often I see things happen. And in a healthy human nervous system, we would reach out. We would say, help me, help. We'd say, oh my God, that was so scary. We would just accept and trust that the other person is going to respond. And in health, the other person would respond. It would just be totally an authentic reaction to respond in our health. And just how much that gets shut down, even in relationships, right? And then the last one I just want to name, because it's important to name, is fawning, which is a type of freeze, but I just want to name it because it's such a common one that people don't realize. And what fawning is, if you think, it's like learning how to be as small as possible and as non-threatening as possible. So, let's say there's a big bear and you're, out by the bear. It's like your nervous system is like, I'm going to please this bear. I'm going to do whatever I need to please this bear because I do not want to make this bear mad in any way. And that's where it's healthy. Many of us are walking around in that all the time. We fawned to the teacher, we fawned to our parents, we fawn at our work, we fawn to our partner. And what it looks like is we're just trying to be as pleasing as possible so that we do not get bitten. And that's what's underneath it. And then what that looks like is we're not being authentic. We can't bring our anger and our sadness and our fear and there isn't room for all of that. And then it feels lonely. And it's exhausting, by the way. Fawning is exhausting. It takes a lot of energy.
So much self-abandonment there.
Yeah. Yeah. And for our culture, I'm just going to say it, our culture has wanted to, it's actually intentionally wanted to put us into fawning and put us into levels of freeze and dissociation. That unconsciously, because we have a traumatized culture, that's actually what was perceived as discipline, as structure, as healthy, is the more shut down, the more you're in fawning, the better citizen you are. And I'm not even saying that was intentional. I think it's part of trauma, cultural trauma.
And then the conspiracy for all those ones listening is that there is intent there too.
Yeah.
And
I believe that is there in marketing things and, pharmaceutical. I totally believe that that's there too. Yeah.
Oh, such a juicy topic. And I feel like this might even be a part 2 where we go into more practical in our relationship examples of how we do meet those places and how to help rewrite the story, because this is a lot of our intention of how we live our relational life. This is our dance of sacred relationship. This for me felt like a really strong foundation of what it is, how that looks, where it comes from. And now, okay, what are some really palpable, tangible scenarios where this does come up, how it happens, what's helpful in it? Because I notice even just as I'm listening, I'm like, oh, there's been so many places, Courtney, you've helped me rewrite the story to the trauma, the untold story, held space for it in ways where I felt so seen, heard, understood, where it can integrate and turns into a more empowering trait as a mature adult. And so I really feel maybe a part 2 here.
Yes, let's do it next time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you all for tuning in once again. And I just want to name that Courtney and I have invested a lot of time, a lot of energy into the video aspect of our podcast now. I'm not sure if everyone knows that. And so if you want to see the visual, if you want to see us, if you enjoy receiving podcasts in the way, not just audibly, you can watch this on Spotify. It shows up in video and then also on our YouTube channel. So thank you for tuning in, for listening, for being here. Love feeling you all there. And until next time.
How did that feel? Good. That was good. We did it quick. We did it quick too. And also it felt like we were getting better at being specific about what we're talking about.
Hello, you beautiful humans. If you're still listening, you got a lot of value out of this or previous episodes. Our ask is go down to the show notes, give us some love, click on the donation link there. Even if it's just $1, it's going to go a long way. It's going to help us pay our team members so that we can just keep thumping out episodes for you to evolve in your relationships and deepen in love. This is what we're here for. We're going to keep doing it regardless, so there's no pressure. It would just really help us out. In other exciting news, in October, Courtney and I are going to be opening the doors to our Together online community. It's going to be an apprenticeship to deepen in love, to deepen in sacred relationship. And within this community, you're going to be able to curate your entire experience based off of what you're needing. You can come and join the Together community itself, or you can branch off into the additional, Sacred Dudes mentorship, which is for the men, and there's going to be a Holy Mama mentorship that's for the women. You can do just those if you want, or you can do all three. You get to create the experience that you are needing specifically in your life right now. And so if this is something that's hitting you right in the soul, right in your heart, and you feel chills or you're getting some sort of ping that you need to be there, I want you to go down to the show notes, go click on one of our emails, and shoot us a quick little message saying you want to be on the wait list, and we will add you to it.